it is okay to say, I don't need to add anything to this, right? I can see that my child, my grandchild, this kiddo that I care about has learned what they need to learn. Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. Super thrilled to be back with you. And today we are going to dive into some of your questions. So as you know, on this podcast, sometimes I have a solo episode where I share thoughts, feelings, ideas, suggestions. Sometimes I have a guest here, and sometimes I answer listener questions, and folks who are on my mailing list who have sent in their questions, I try to get to those and share some responses and a little wisdom, much as I do in the Heartful Parent Academy, so that you kind of get a sense for how that might operate, and so I can answer your questions. Now, I can only answer so many questions in one of these episodes, so today we're diving into two separate questions, and the first one might be one of my favorite questions ever that has come in. And part of the reason that it is one of my favorite questions that I've ever gotten for the podcast is the way that the email was written to me. And actually, it was a series of emails that was so loving and lighthearted. It saw the humor in the situation. These caregivers saw the humor in the situation, but also were legitimately trying to figure out how to best support the kiddo involved. So let me paint the scenario for you. So first of all, it was a grandmother who initially emailed me. And here's what she said. She said, "This question is a little off the beaten path, but my 17-year-old grandson is dating a lovely young woman who recently had a birthday. For a birthday gift, he bought her a Victoria's Secret bra. She interpreted this gift as him wanting much more out of the relationship, and she promptly slapped his face and stormed off." Now, this grandmother, I love this because in her email to me, she's applauding this young gal's chutzpah, and said, there was definitely no ambiguity in her reaction, but this grandma was looking for some ways to support her grandson navigate this precarious situation. Grandma was very convinced that, and I am as well, this was an innocent, dumb mistake by a 17-year-old boy, and that the gal involved is a lovely young gal. Like, both of these young people are good, lovely, loving people. And so grandma wanted just some advice or some information on how to best support her grandson. While that was, while that message came in, it's taken me quite some time to get to this question for the podcast. She followed up with a second email and, sort of said she would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, kind of watching how this whole thing unfolded. And she pointed out that the thing that made her so proud as a grandma is that her grandson was much more concerned about this young gal's feelings, this young woman's feelings, than he was about, getting slapped. Like, he certainly did not respond in any sort of a physical way, and was just really distraught that he had hurt her feelings or given her an impression that wasn't accurate, that she had misinterpreted the gift. I mean, with good reason, but that, that wasn't sort of his intention behind the gift. And then I got another email from grandma who updated me yet again and said they have made amends and they are back together. And then this young man's mom also messaged me about it and just sort of sharing kind of her take on it all, which very much mirrored grandma's. They were both trying to help this young man who's soon to be an adult through, sort of navigating this early relationship process. And they shared that, as I said, these two young people made amends. She kissed him on the cheek. That was a lot better than the slap that he had gotten with the gift, and all was well. But the question remains, and sort of I want to look at this from a bigger question standpoint, is what do we do when we are watching our young people, our tweens and teens, navigate relationships, and how much do we sort of lean in, weigh in, give them advice, and how much do we let them navigate on their own? And when they make a goof, when they make a misstep like this, to what degree do we, get ourselves involved? And going back to sort of like why this is one of my favorite questions that I've ever gotten is because this grandma could have messaged me and said, I can't believe this young woman who slapped my grandson and he wants to get back with her. And, she's toxic. I mean, who knows what could have been said about this. And I really appreciated that grandma and mom and this young man really saw this as an opportunity for learning and growth. There was a misstep here, and that was a space that they could support him in. So here's how I would sort of answer the bigger question. And I'm going to answer that bigger question through this scenario. Really, where I want to start with is, as this situation was described, I suspect that this young man really got all the learning that he needed to, right? His girlfriend put him in his place, taught him what sort of was okay and wasn't okay with her. And that was, I suspect, a massive moment of learning for this young man. And we can talk in a moment about the way the girlfriend handled this. And don't worry, I'm not going to leave that. I'm not going to forget that. But this is one of those situations where, as a parent or as a grandparent or another loving caregiver, it is okay to say, I don't need to add anything to this, right? I can see that my child, my grandchild, this kiddo that I care about, has learned what they need to learn. And that is something that sometimes I think we are afraid to admit or afraid to say, because we're like, wait a minute, it's my job as a loving caregiver to teach a lesson or to weigh in and to share my wisdom. And the reality is, we don't always need to do that. And sometimes if we would just back up and get out of the way, life is going to teach its own lessons. Now, if this grandma or mom had realized before the gift was given what this young man was going to give as a gift, there may have been an opportunity to sort of lean in there and, get really curious. Hey, I'm curious why you chose that gift, and, kind of what you're hoping her response is. How do you think she might interpret it? All of those kinds of questions where we aren't lecturing, we aren't teaching, we are getting curious and letting our young people kind of work through those things on their own. In this case, mom and grandma didn't know about the gift in advance. And so, the learning happened, and we don't need to weigh in any further, except insofar as the young person is asking for our support or our advice. And I just really, if you take nothing else away from this little story in this episode, it is the idea that learning, growth, expansion for our children happens in many, many, many different ways. And we don't always need a voice or a say in that. We can let the learning of the world, do what it's going to do. And in fact, I would say 99 times out of 100, that learning will be more impactful than if we are sitting down and trying to share our wisdom, right? That's a quick way to get a teen, especially, to shut down. So, my first thing here is, let's just back up and say, is this really a situation where my advice, my wisdom, my perspective is required? And if you're hesitant, the answer is probably no. And that's a good opportunity to just practice kind of stepping away and saying, not today. Not today. I'm not going to weigh in today. Now, once the whole thing happened, again, going back to this specific scenario, once the whole thing happened, it sounds as if this young man did come to mom and grandma and say, "Oh my goodness, like that was misinterpreted. I got slapped. It didn't go well." And, what do you think I should do? Right? It sounds like there was some nature of conversation along those lines. This is a place, especially when our young people are coming to us and asking what they should do or how to handle something, where we can weigh in, but we want to be really careful about how we do that. Because again, we could go in and lecture, we could go in teaching mode, we could go in and sharing all of our own stories. And it's, again, probably a pretty quick way to get our teen to shut down. And so we're going to use the same tool I described a little bit ago, which is curiosity and empathy, right? So, and I'm going to actually reverse those. So we were going to start with empathy. We're going to start with validation, and then we're going to move into curiosity. So what that might look like in this situation is, oh man, that's a situation, isn't it, kiddo? I am so sorry that that happened, that unfolded in that way. You must have been really surprised or shocked, or, you might have gotten your confidence in this relationship rocked a little bit, not sure what to do, right? So we can keep the conversation super real, super, casual, but in those words that I just shared, we're validating the way this kid felt. We're helping label those emotions. We're empathizing, like, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And then we're going to work on the assumption they've already asked for some help or advice, but we're going to reiterate, that's really tough. It sounds like you would like my advice, but I want to double check that before I dive in or before we talk further. Right? So what we're doing there again is we're getting their permission to share our wisdom, and they will connect with you so much more deeply when we do that. So, I just want to make sure you're cool with me, like sharing kind of my thoughts about this, right? And if they say yes, that would be fine. Then again, we want to lean in to that critical skill of curiosity. How are you feeling? What did you think was going to happen versus what happened? What was your thought process as you selected this gift for your girlfriend? How do you think, given her reaction, how do you think she interpreted that? Does that feel like a reasonable interpretation when we put ourselves in her shoes, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And by asking lots of questions, we can help our young people sort of dial in or solidify their own thoughts and understanding. But we're not going to let them get entrenched in negative messaging, right? So we don't want them, of course, going down the road of, I'm a terrible boyfriend, I'm a bad person, I should have known better. None of that's productive. So what we can just say is, okay, so you made a mistake. Like, what do you think you would do differently next time? And then where the real learning can happen is, what would you like to do to move forward? And that's a great question in so many different situations. What would you like to do to move forward? Right? That can happen. You can ask that question after a test goes badly, or as in this case, after a relationship goes badly. And then we can say, there are some skills. And so, we might say, like, let's talk about the elements of a good apology or a good repair, right? Which is, I am so sorry that I made you feel X, Y, and Z. And we can say that was not my intent, but my intent isn't nearly as important as how you received it, right? Because our intent can be awesome, but if it isn't received that way, that's what actually matters, right? And so we can teach our kids that, and then we can teach them how to make that genuine apology, to take responsibility, and then to say, moving forward, clearly that I won't be shopping at Victoria's Secret for you. And, I own that I didn't buy the best gift. I would like to get you a different gift for your birthday if you'd be open to it. And I'm hoping that we can move forward. However it is, what you want to do is sort of lay out those elements of making the apology, taking responsibility, making the repair, and then resolving the issue, which is, how do we now move forward? And making it really clear that we want our young people to understand a good apology isn't saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not an apology. That's not taking responsibility for our role in that. I'm sorry I made you feel that way is a good apology, right? So that is a space where there can be some learning. Now, in this situation that grandma and mom messaged me about, this young man, with the support of his mom and grandma, made amends. They did, this relationship resumed. They got back together. She kissed him on the cheek. Sounds like an improvement over the slap. And all's well that ends well, right? There's a few other things, though, that I want to sort of mention here. So first is this young gal's response, which I'm with grandma. She's got some chutzpah. I hope I'm saying that word properly. She's got some guts, and I want to applaud this young woman for knowing what is and is not okay with her, right? I want to applaud her for being really clear in her own mind on where she stands in this relationship and where she's willing to go physically, emotionally, etc. That I think is so critical to, that's what we want from our young people growing up. That being said, for those of us who are the parents of, well, I was going to say the parents of girls, but really the parents of any child, we don't want a physical response to be the first response unless their safety is at risk. And so we do want to teach our young men and our young women good relationship skills, good problem solving skills. And in the situation, as it was described to me, there was no physical concern here, no threat, right? Emotionally threatened. She felt emotionally threatened and put on the spot. And that can trigger our brain and we don't always respond well. But what we do want to work with our young people on is having constructive initial responses. And so what this young woman might have done instead of slapping this young guy is saying, wow, I'm not sure what you intended with this gift, but it feels like you're wanting more, that this gift suggests that you want more from our relationship than I am willing to give right now. And so I'm going to give you back this gift because that's just not something I'm willing to accept, right? So we want to help our kids learn words and how to use those words and feel confident in using their words before we go to a physical response. Now, I have taught my daughters time and time again, on the playground or at school or whatever, unless like your safety is immediately at risk, the first thing we do is use our words, right? If that doesn't work, we seek out support from somebody else. And if we can't find somebody else, by all means, it is always okay to physically defend ourselves, whether that's just, somebody being annoying and like snapping our bra strap, or somebody, truly at risk of harming us, right? A physical response at some point along the way is always okay. Now, if we are at risk of immediate harm, by all means, bite, scratch, kick, punch, do whatever we need to do, young man, whatever your gender is, right? Whatever the gender, safety, body safety, always first. But what it sounds to me a little bit in this situation is that this young gal's like sort of emotional safety got triggered, and she may not have great skills in terms of that reactivity versus responsiveness. So we want to work on self-regulation skills, on communication skills, relationship skills, repairs, having hard conversations, all of those sorts of things. We want to be modeling and talking about with curiosity and all of that to help our kids learn in a situation like this one, right, where she got a gift that she felt was inappropriate, that she's the first go-to is not a slap, right? That it's a conversation. Now, these are learning, like these kids at age 17 or, in those high school years, it's a learning period. They are learning, and we have to meet them where they are at. And so explore with them, how could that go better next time, right? If something like this happens again. And that is where the guidance that we can provide comes in through, as I said, modeling, talking, curiosity, Yes, some teaching. I love doing a quick public service announcement by text message. Public service announcement, just so you know, it's always best to end a relationship in person or over the phone rather than by text message. This is a conversation I recently had with my own teenager. And so I don't want to give anybody the impression that there isn't room for teaching and wisdom and all of that. There is. We just want to be cautious with our tweens and teens about how we use it, when we use it, to what degree, and that we're falling back on maybe some other skills more heavily, like curiosity. Okay. So that was a very lengthy, somewhat rambling response. But like I said, I thought this story was just so charming in that we have a young teenage boy, a young teenage girl. They're early dating, really like each other, and they both made some missteps, that there's some growth there. And I suspect that most of that growth happened without any input from the loving, caring adults in their lives. And, when we need to help move that growth forward, we can do that in the best way with empathy, validation, and curiosity. All right. Thank you so much to the mom and grandma who sent that question in. It was a fun one. It was a fun one to dive into. All right. The second question that has come in that I want to dive into today is actually sort of a conglomeration of questions, right? It has not come from just one family or one parent. It's one of those questions that has been popping up in my world a lot recently from private coaching clients, Heartful Parent Academy members, and readers of my newsletter, listeners of the podcast. So I'm not going to read you a question, but I'm going to boil down what all of these parents have been asking me about and struggling with and attempt to give you an answer. So here's the question. What is a parent supposed to do when they have a child, especially a younger child, who has picked up on the joy and thrill of the cuss word and are using them at times when it's not appropriate, or they're using those words around you, and you really wish that they would not do that? And you've asked them to stop, and that has almost fueled their fire, and they are, saying those words with even more joy and pleasure. What do you do? Okay, so I need to, before I answer this question, and some of you who know me or have, met me, you may already know this, but I'm going to answer this with a slight bias because I am an adult who was not allowed to swear as a child. I rarely heard my parents swear. And yet, as an adult, I love me a good cuss word, right? There are moments in our lives when there just simply are no other words that encapsulate the moment as beautifully as the word fuck, shit, damn, whatever it might be, right? Okay. So that is my bias. I will also tell you, full confession, that my children, my beloved children, hear me swear on a fairly regular basis. However, I will also tell you that as an adult who likes to cuss, I understand that there are places where that's appropriate. I understand there are places where that is not appropriate. I can usually read my audience, and I know that I will be judged for those words, for better or for worse, right? You may be judging me right now. You may have just heard me cuss and be like, yeah, she's my people. Or you may have just heard me cuss and be like, oh, yeah, that's cringeworthy, right? Like that's just not appropriate or not needed on a podcast. Whatever it is, like you reached some judgment about that in your mind. And, maybe it was somewhere in between. And so, and I will add to that, that I don't love hearing children cuss. And there are certain situations where I don't love hearing adults cuss. So I understand context and audience and all of those things as I see it, right? Okay, so that's the background that I'm going to answer this question with. And what I'm going to say about cuss words, whether you're dealing with a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old, is unless you're prepared to lock them in their room, wash their mouth out with soap, we can't actually control a child's mouth. We cannot control what they say. The only person that we can control is ourselves. So if you have a child who's loving cussing, as much as it pains me to say this, the first place that we have to look is at our own behavior. Yes, even the cusser is saying we got to look at our own behavior and see what we are modeling and, sort of what we are conveying inadvertently to our children as okay. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing in all of this is, really recognizing, and well, I sort of said this with the first thing, but we cannot actually make them stop. That is a painful reality, right? We cannot make children do homework. We cannot make them move faster, right? The only person whose behavior we can control is our own. Thus the need for self-reflection. But with that comes a need to kind of let go of the delusion that we can control what our children do and don't say. Okay, so all of that being said, if you have a kid who's cussing and you don't like to hear it, or they're using it at school or in inappropriate places around adults that you don't want to hear them, we do want to have some ways of modifying that behavior or gaining cooperation from our kids. So after we sort of get self-reflective and look at our own behavior, the second step, or very closely tied with that first step, is to manage your own behavior, to stay calm, to manage your big feelings about it. Because the more ramped up you get, the more upset you get, the more your children will know who this is fun, because this can really piss mom or dad off. This can really get them worked up. And we know that children will seek out negative attention, right, in lieu of connection that they're missing for whatever reason. So it can be a really fun thing for kids to push mom and dad's buttons. It may be connection seeking behavior. It may be boundary pushing behavior, but whatever it is, it's totally normal, totally natural, and developmentally appropriate. So what do we do? Well, the first thing that I would try to do is not in the moment, not when it's happening, but at some point when they're calm, you can say, you know what, there is a difference between grown-up words and kid words. And you hear mommy or daddy say some grown-up words, they're not okay for you to say. At least it's not okay for you to say them in public spaces or around me. However, and here's the clincher, however, you can go into your bedroom or into the bathroom and say them as much as your little heart would like to, right? As much as your little heart desires. You may say all the bad words, all the grown-up words in the privacy of your bathroom or your bedroom. So what we're doing here is we are giving them some boundaries. We're not trying to stop, prohibit, prevent the behavior entirely. We're saying, yeah, right on. You can use those words, but you got to do it in your room. Okay, so for some kids, that will work. That for many years mostly worked with my older daughter. And, she was pretty contented to swear in her bedroom or in her bathroom. Some kids, however, will say, oh yeah, you think I'm only going to use it in my bedroom? Well, watch me use it in other places. So if you have one of those kids, then we've got some other boundaries that we want to set. So the first one is, and this goes with that staying calm piece. When it's happening, if you are in a situation in which you can do so, I would ignore it. Do not let it push your buttons, because that will encourage the behavior. Ignore it. Now, what you might say, like, let's say you're in the process of making dinner, or, you're going to take them to the store or whatever it is. You can say, oh, wow, I see that you've chosen to use some grown-up words. Remember, we talked about the fact that you can say those in your bedroom. So, I see that you made a different choice. I'm going to wait. I will start working on dinner once you are done with that, right? Once you're done and once you've made a repair. So you can also require that repair. If you're in the car and they're doing it in the car, they're arguing with their siblings, pull that car over and say, well, I would start by not saying anything. And if they're like, Mom, Dad, what are we doing? Where are we going? Why are we stopped? You can say, oh, well, it seems like you're having some trouble managing your behavior. So, while you guys are back there in the back seat breaking the rules, not keeping the cuss words in your bedroom, I'm just going to pull over so that we can all stay calm. And they stop cussing and you keep going. So this is not an attempt to control their behavior because you can't, but it is conveying to them what you will or will not do as a result of their behavior. So you will pull over the car until they're done. You won't continue driving. You won't make dinner. You won't take them to their play date until they're done, right? So this in positive discipline is the decide what you will do tip. And it can work really, really well. Okay. The next big piece of this is, and this is really hard because our egos get so wrapped up in parenting. The next piece of this is to let the natural consequences play out. So if you're a kid, as my friend, my dear, dear friend, Heather did when she was a kid, her grandmother was over and she looked out the window and said, look at those fucking ducks. Or something like that, those fucking ducks. And her grandmother was shocked, dismayed, and appalled. And her grandmother stepped in and said, you cannot say that in front of me. Meanwhile, her mom was laughing her ass off in the corner. But, right, we let that other person sort of convey. And oftentimes our kids will be more responsive to another individual than they will to us. When my daughter was in elementary school, she was overheard in the hallway. So remember, I told her that the rule was you can only use that in your bedroom. And you may recall that I said she was pretty good with that for quite a while. Well, then it started to come out in other places. And we had also said, you may not let your teachers hear you say that. Well, she was out in the hallway, and I don't even remember what grade this is. I think 4th grade. And a substitute teacher heard her out in the hall tell one of her classmates, I already took that fucking test. Well, my sweet, sweet child was sent immediately to the principal's office where she had to talk to the principal about her language. And that was really scary and really intimidating to her. And we have never had a problem like that since. Now, she is 15 years old. She's a teenager. And I know damn well that she cusses. The rule still is, I don't want to hear it. I don't need to hear it from you in front of me, not till you're an adult. But I do know, and she's let it slip. I do know that she cusses around her friends, but she's been really good and really clear about the boundaries. She doesn't let her teachers hear her. She's very careful when she's out in public around other adults. And she has started at age 15 to understand what I was describing earlier, right? To understand the context and the audience. My 7-year-old, who I should knock on wood right now, has not gone down the road of swearing yet. She, I don't think, would understand at age 7 context and audience in the same way that my 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old does. So I can't control what my teen does, but I can still set boundaries around it. I can still decide what I will or won't do as a result of her behavior. And the biggest thing in all of this is to remember to manage ourselves and to not, add fuel to the fire. Because the more we, don't do that, right? The more we get upset about it and this is true with any behavior that we don't like, right? Have you ever had a kid that, you say something and they say the exact same thing, right? They're playing that mimic game, drives you nuts. But the more you try to stop them, the more they do it, because it is connection seeking behavior. It is boundary pushing behavior. And there is joy and adventure and mischief in doing that. And those things are all awesome when you're a kid. So we don't, if it truly bothers us, we don't want to fuel that. And I think even if it doesn't bother you, we all understand that there is a time and a place and an audience for these words, this type of language. And we need to help our kids learn that and develop those skills as they grow. And we need to convey to them, that idea that I said earlier, which is recognizing that if they do choose to use these words, whether it's on their podcast 20 years from now or just when they're hanging out with their friends, people will make a judgment about that. It will be positive, negative, or neutral, but there will be a judgment made, and they have to be prepared to accept that judgment. Just as I am prepared to accept your judgment for the curse words I have thrown around on this episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. But whether you loved it or hated it, what I do want to say is I hope the answer to these two questions was helpful in your own parenting journey. And I hope you learned something. I want to reiterate how very grateful I am that you are here, that you come back week after week after week to listen to the Heartful Parent Podcast. It is a labor of love from me to you, and I truly enjoy being able to provide this content. On that note, don't forget that if you would like to get more advice like this about something coming up in your world, in your parenting, with your co-parent, whatever it might be, the Heartful Parent Academy is the place where you can do that. You can join us, and at least 3 times a month, you will get access directly to me to answer all your most pressing parenting questions. Would love to see you in there. There's a link for how you can join down below. And in the meantime, have a great week. I'll see you back here soon. Cheers.